And financing strategies. So as you know that this is our fourth Gobeshona Global Conference, and we are almost at the end of this conference. So this is one of our today's session for focusing on non-economic loss and damage. Why we are going to focus on non-economic loss and damage, I'm giving you a bit of context, and then we'll be moving to our distinguished speakers. So in the context of climate change, non-economic loss and damage refers to the intangible impacts such as loss, culture, identity, and traditional knowledge, which are often overlooked in traditional economic assessments. So that's the reason that why we need to focus on non-economic loss and damage individually, and why it's important to focus on economic loss and damage as well as non-economic loss and damage parallelly. So ECAD has conducted case studies in Bangladesh, recognizing the significance of loss and damage, and specifically focusing on non-economic loss and damage, with partnering with KrishnAid CJRF. So we will be hearing from our partners and colleagues from CJRF and KrishnAid. So before going to the presentation, I'll invite our today's I'll invite Nujhat Jabin, Country Director, KrishnAid Bangladesh, to open our session today. So she has nearly 2 decades of experience in the development sector. Her areas of focus has been governance and rights, inclusive fiscal politics, advancing workers' rights, and climate justice work. So I'll invite her to start our session today. Thank you, Nujhat.
Thank you so much. First of all, I'd like to thank ICAT for inviting us and giving us the opportunity to partner on this very, very important issue. As you have rightly said, that there is loss and damage, and there is it has been sort of accepted that there is climate change, as a result of the changing climate scenario, that the vulnerable populations are experiencing loss and damage. And along with that, the non-economic loss and damage that we have is greatly overlooked. It hasn't been really recognized, or it hasn't really been, it's difficult to also quantify in many cases. So there is a need for evidence to, when we are talking about policy changes, when we are advocating for addressing non-economic loss and damage, there's a need for evidence as to how do we quantify these things. And KrishnAid is really is pleased that we could be part of this study with ICAD, and we are hopeful that we'll be able to take this learning, this evidence, to new heights, both in country and beyond. So that's where we're looking at, and we hope that we'd be able to generate the sort of momentum that is expected from this evidence generation and this exchange. And we look forward to sort of deepening this partnership in the coming years. So I'll stop here, and over to you. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you so much, Nujhat. Before starting our presentation, all of our presentation will focus on getting more idea about the non-economic loss and damage, and how we are getting the core of the non-economic loss and damage, as well as we will showcase the success stories where small grants and innovative financing strategies have made a tangible impact. So I'll invite our first speaker, Nusrat Nausheen from ECAD, to present her idea about the non-economic loss and damage. She's currently working as a program coordinator at the International Center for Climate Change and Development. She has coordinating the ICAD's loss and damage program for the past 2 years, and actively engaged in various research projects on loss and damage. So over to you, Nusrat.
Thank you so much, Sumaya. So hello, everyone. Good evening from Bangladesh. So I'll just quickly share my screen so that everyone can take a look. Okay. Can everyone see my screen? Great. So again, hi everyone. So my name is Nusrat. As Sumaya already mentioned, that I am currently coordinating ECAT's loss and damage work, and we have extensively worked in different various domains and fields in the loss and damage arena. And non-economic loss and damage is one of the key areas in which we are devoting a lot of our resources and focus on. So this is a new concept that we have been conducting some in-depth research since last year. So that it's something that we're calling value-based approach towards addressing non-economic loss and damage. So a number of our colleagues and researchers in ECAD have contributed towards this a previous study last year, and this year we're doing this work with partners in Christian Aid, and a new partnership is arising with CGRF, as Sumaya mentioned as well. So I'll just briefly touch base on the kind of research work that we're focusing on. So here we have kind of identified 5 different types of non-economic losses. So there are, of course, many different kinds, but these are some of the focus areas that we have mainly pinpointed towards our research. So one is a biodiversity and ecosystem loss. So as we know, this is something that does extend extensively, but it's something that it cannot be quantified or measured. So it often gets overlooked and undervalued. So, and then there is the issue with human mobility. It's a big impact of climate change induced losses and damages, but it's something that cannot be we cannot put a dollar value to it. So displacement or human mobility is an important factor that needs to be addressed. Then we have culture and heritage loss, which refers to the different kind of practices and knowledge that people are losing because of the adverse impacts of climate change. But again, it's impossible to put a proper value, a standardized value to it. Then we have mental health loss. It's a very important issue, and I'll delve more into it towards the end of my presentation, how different people, even though they don't say it, because when losses and damages hit, they normally prefer to talk about, the economic losses, but the depression or the anxiety that they feel because of those losses and damages, it has a very rigorous outcome on their own well-being. And then we have the inclusive nature, which includes gender or disabled people. So these are some of the 5 types of non-economic losses that we have identified during our research work. So here, basically, the methodology that we're using is basically, as I mentioned, that we started this particular idea since last year. We had a visiting researcher, Dawe. We definitely owe a lot to him because he started spinning around this new methodology or new terminology called local values. So this is basically an initial study that we conducted with IIED called Centering Local Values Towards Addressing Non-Economic Loss and Damage. And in that study, we identified about 10 local values, which were mainly drawn up from local communities. So it has a very important criteria that is, getting the ideas or getting the kind of the responses from the local communities themselves and not prescribing it from our end. So in order to expand and strengthen the evidence that is required, this new stream of research evidence we are trying to spin. So this year and last year, we also did a few field-based work in different areas in the southern part of Bangladesh as well as the northern part of Bangladesh. So we have conducted about 600 surveys in which we try to identify the different kind of needs that the local communities have and the different kinds of responses that they are proposing from their end. So this is basically the index or the different kinds of loss and non-economic losses and damages that we have identified. As you can see, there is again, these are the index is from local communities themselves. So it has development, impacts on development, education, health, nature, religion, culture, society, family, serenity, and mental health. So these are the different kinds of impacts that they have identified themselves, the local communities. And then we had to, make it more compressed and make it into subgroups. And then finally, we came up with these 10 indicators of local values. So mainly the main idea behind the study is that we get a proper understanding of the local perceptions of climate change and how these effects are creating pressure on the different kinds of, as I mentioned, the non-economic losses, the 5 types that I did mention before. So in order to understand that, we started off our questions with them on what do they perceive as vulnerability and why do they think that they're vulnerable. So here we the kind of responses we got from them is that they a lot of the people, they live in the riverine areas and by the river banks, so they are in a flood prone area and drought prone area and erosion prone area. So the acknowledgement or the understanding that they are vulnerable and the reason why they think they're vulnerable, they have that clear understanding. But it is unfortunate that they do not understand what climate change is, or climate change could be a factor that adds on to their vulnerability. So it's something that there is a gap in that factor itself. So basically, we the one of the main quotes that we have understood from the research or the study is that residents continuously had to move further inlands due to seasonal erosion. So even if it's a kilometer or 2 kilometers, they have to move every season. They have 2 kilometers inland. So every year, and this doesn't get accounted for because this internal displacement is happening every year, every season, but it's something that does exist in reality. So basically, the perception of value is basically to understand what the local values or what people value the most in life, so that we know that the losses and damages, what are the losses and damages that needs to be accounted for, that needs to be assessed, and that should be the one that we should focus our research questions on. So the values, as I mentioned before, the 10 values that we have subcategorized as indicators. So here we asked the interviewees if someone has experienced non-economic loss and damage, but they do not understand what those are. So we had to break it down to pinpoint that if they have any loss of social cohesion, if they have a loss of cultural heritage. So here in this graph, you can see that health impact is one of the biggest impacts that they feel, and they have all mentioned about it because they don't even have proper healthcare or medical facilities in order to address that kind of impact. Then displacement, or as I mentioned, displacement or internal migration is very common among those people. So the specific losses that they did mention is loss of lives. This is, of course, one of the biggest ones that they feel all the time. Mental pressure, as I mentioned, that later in the presentation, I'll mention more on it. So sleeplessness or anxiety or trauma, even the little children, when they feel that they are not being able to go to school because of the entire village being flooded. These are some very individual and specific losses that they mentioned during the interviews. And again, these are some things that cannot be quantified in person. So the impacts is basically, the entire study is centered around what people are feeling, how the local communities, how they perceive, what are the losses they think are important, what are the values they think is important. And again, all of these impacts it differs from one person to another. For example, if there is a different community, if there's a Hindu community, for them a loss of a temple has more value than of a Muslim community. So again, the people's perception are different from each other, hence the non-economic losses and damages that they feel is different from each other. So these are some of the numerical findings that we had, that loss of indigenous knowledge goes about 43 respondents mentioned about that, but majority of the people talked about loss of local practices, livelihoods, and religious monuments. A lot of people in I think the two divisions that we went to, I think majority of the people were Muslims, but again, the few people that we found from other religions, even for them, loss of religious monuments has a very big impact on them, because we asked them, a lot of them, that to scale their feeling towards a loss of a religious monument, and for most of them, the impact was on a Richter scale of 5. So it was very important to hold those values and to account for them. And again, same with the needs. The addressing or the solution part is the same, that it's different from one another. The way a loss happens, similarly, the solution is something that is dependent on the loss that that person feels. So if a person, for example, if a child loses a toy, and his way of addressing that particular loss is different from that an adult. So similarly, the solutions are different from each other. So here you can see some of the local responses that people did share, that it's important to have a flood shelter or a riverbank erosion when the rivers get eroded, when they are displaced, they have a shelter, proper shelter. Early warning system again is very, very important. But I think the most, of course, the most is financial assistance or any kinds of relief. And for some of the, as I mentioned, the solutions are different, because if they are living in a river erosion prone area, they want embankment, but not the same for a flood, because if they are in a flood prone area, they want shelters. So again, the responses is very context specific and depending on the geographical location and the different kind of impacts that they're facing. So why is it important to look at the local values? As I mentioned, that values shape how people perceive risk. And it shows that climate change is more than just, financial or economic responses and impacts. And hence, local values are probably a new way that we can put a value or put a measure or quantity in order to measure non-economic losses and damages, because again, it's something that is up in the air and people are talking about how to address it. With the new loss and damage fund that has been created, people are still wondering, how do you quantify non-economic loss and damage? The WIM, the Warsaw International Mechanism of Loss and Damage, the WIM EXCOM, they have been there for a long time. They have 5 expert groups. One of the expert group is on non-economic losses and damages, but they're also, they have been doing a lot of scoping studies from different countries and trying out different research methods. But maybe this is one way, one innovative way, or one important way to make sure that voices of the people are heard and that local values are being centered towards when we're accounting for non-economic losses and damages. And I think I'm towards the end of my presentation. These are some of the heart-touching testimonies that we have heard from the people. So a lot, for example, a Muslim community representative, he said that they have been deprived of praying in Jamaat due to the only mosque in that village being washed away during riverbank erosion. Then we have this Hindu community representative. She said that we have a puja which requires 7 different kinds of flowers, and they put a garland over their gods, but now we struggle to get these flowers. Another representative said, due to lack of graveyards, we bury the departed by the shore, which then gets washed away during the flood. So these are some very heart-wrenching testimonies that we heard during our interviews, and it's important that these local voices come up to the surface so that people understand the gravity or the depth of the impacts that people are facing. And honestly, I think the lesson that we learned during these studies is that they're the best solutions. They come up with the best fit ideas on how to respond to these impacts. So I think it's very important that we keep them, we center all of our decision or all of the methodologies that we come up, we center it towards the local people. So I think that's all from me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nusrat. Thank you for your very brief contextual idea what we are doing from ECAT side in some of our project area. So it's also a project that where ECAT is working with Christian Aid and the local partners too. So we are getting like different overviews from different areas from Bangladesh. So now we'll be moving to some of the getting some different perspective from Malawi. So I'll invite Mr. Julius Goma from Malawi to give his presentation, and he is the National Coordinator for Civil Society Network on Climate Change in Malawi, Environment, Natural Resources, and Climate Change Management Specialist also. So over to you, Julius.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfect.
Great. So apologies for joining in a bit late. I think I can share my slide.
Yes, perfect. Go ahead.
Right. So yeah, so I hope you can see my slide. You can see my slide?
Yes, perfect.
All right. So I'm happy to be part of this conversation, and my contribution from Malawi is going to be just on what we've learned from Scottish government example of providing financing for loss and damage, and how blended anticipatory action can work together with the to minimize loss and damage, but also looking at the ex post action on addressing loss and damage, how the communities were able to tell us the story or to help us learn on how best we can address and minimize losses and damage on in their communities. So I think for those that have no idea of maybe a little idea of what Malawi is, I think for the last maybe let me just say Malawi is a Southern African country, which is bordering Mozambique, Tanzania, and Zambia. And for the last 5 years or so, we've been affected by so many of the climate-related hazards, and one of the critical ones that has made us to have a lot of challenges and start to talk about loss and damage is the increase in the frequency and intensity of the cyclones that we've been receiving. So we've had almost like over 5 cyclones for the last 4 years or so, and these cyclones have had enormous impact. And then just recently, I think last year in 2023, we had Cyclone Freddy, which also had a lot of devastating impacts. But it was a year where we're actually having a double tragedy, where we experienced cyclones in the south, but also drought in the north. And then these are just some of the figures that we got after making several assessments on how the communities have been affected, but how much money we also require in terms of recovery from the Cyclone Freddy alone. So yeah, so my presentation, as I already said, is focusing on the Scottish government example on loss and damage funding and how communities were able to make inputs or suggestions towards what kind of funding is required to address both economic and non-economic losses. Where are the gaps? What needs to be managed? So from the funding that we got from the Scottish government that went through SCIA, TROCA, and CISONEC, my organization, we carried out a number of research studies, but we are also implementing a project that is action research in nature. So we're trying to work with the local communities to identify their local needs with regards to loss and damage, but also work with them to support us in terms of defining what loss and damage mean in their context, and also be able to categorize what loss, non-economic and economic losses. I will not repeat some of the issues that the previous speakers actually alluded to in terms of what the communities were able to identify to say, let's say loss of life, loss of livelihoods, and categorize those as in the spectrum of whether it's economic or non-economic losses. But in this study, what we tried to do was to involve the communities to do local level assessment to establish their experiences on losses and damages, both economic and non-economic, but also work with the communities to co-design interventions using participatory techniques that these interventions that would fit in the loss and damage spectrum, but also identify the priorities for response measures, and also being able to propose the funding mechanisms that can be able to address the sort of identified local needs. So what does it mean to say loss and damage in practice in Malawi according to the local communities? So we had several interventions that were actually being identified, but these were categorized into either dealing with the issue of loss and damage, anticipatory action, or adaptation related interventions, but also whether it's economic or non-economic. So these are what you can see is the list of some of the interventions that we had. And the committees themselves were able to say this is what we need to be done. For example, rehabilitation of water infrastructure, rehabilitation of the private buildings as part of the economic losses and damages. But dealing with the non-economic losses and damages, several interventions were also identified, like rehabilitation of the grave sites. I think the previous speaker also was actually able to say some of these things. Support to mental health impacts, provision of temporary accommodation, and even psychosocial support. These are some of the elements that were coming out clearly in what the communities actually identified as initiatives. But also they were able to also tell us what initiatives are within the adaptation activity spectrum. So construction of additional, let's say, flood defenses for areas that were flooded, and also rebuilding of some of the homes in accordance with the government recommendations to enhance resilience in the future climate extreme weather impacts. So why? I think when we're trying to work with these communities, they were able to come out clearly to say that within the spectrum of the activities that we're able to identify, we still need to blend actions that minimize loss and damage, but also those that address loss and damage, because we're looking at those that are adaptation related in nature and those that are exposed. So if the cyclone hits them, what are some of the needs? What are some of the things that needs to happen in the community? So the project focused on community-based needs in places directly affected by frequent loss and damage events, as I indicated, cyclones and flooding and drought. And we were actually able to work with the communities to identify those actions that would actually be preventative in nature, and also those that are responsive in nature. These were actually interventions that were valuable to the communities themselves. So from that kind of conversation where we had to categorize these activities, communities were able to call for kind of innovative kind of funding. For example, they request that any funding that needs to go to the communities to address their needs must be in one of those kind of funding should be in the micro grant funding, which should at least as we're talking about the loss and damage fund that has been created, then there has to be a window that should provide such kind of micro grants, and then these micro grants can actually focus on whether preventive action or recovery action, and even having a window that should have a rapid response, to support the communities where action is needed when an event has actually occurred. And addressing we actually learned that loss and damage can actually be addressed through a spectrum of adaptation, including and even loss and damage related issues, looking at what the communities were able to identify. So coming from what I've already presented, we are saying that on a small scale, in communities who are in constant cycles of recovery or preparedness, remember our project was focusing on areas that have perpetually been, affected by either cyclones, drought, flooding. We have already identified that some communities are perpetually, being affected, and they are in a process of recovery every time. So every year when a cyclone or a flood comes in, they are also being affected. They are, responding. They are also recovering. So in that situation, it's very clear that we need that kind of blended approach to financing. So loss and damage fund should address these definitional issues. For example, establishing a micro grant, as I've already indicated, the funding window, which is actually responsive to the community needs. Also should establish an agreed, where there has to be an agreed definition of actions towards addressing loss and damage, and also invest in national level mechanisms which should ensure responsiveness at the pace and based on the needs, but also including a slow onset funding window that draws on global best practice to address loss and damage impact. As I'm concluding, on the NED, the loss and damage funding should also be able to look into the non-economic loss and damage element. So like as I indicated, that one of the interventions or some of the interventions that the committees were able to identify were in the form of psychosocial support, for example, preservation of heritage of any, heritage, restoration of ecosystems, but also biodiversity. So these are some of the areas that where the funding windows that can be created should actually look into, particularly making sure that there is a macro grant funding window that should also focus on either slow onset or rapid onset funds. So finally, how do we enable loss and damage funding to localized action? For example, by providing financing to develop and operationalize national mechanisms to respond to loss and damage. There's a lot more to be done at national level that should help to communities, but even the nation, to understand what is there. So funding development of data services, software, processes to manage responses, funding towards building capacity of institutions to support local level rapid response, but also a readiness and the capacity support initiative that funded by the loss and damage fund would actually support this work so that we can be able to draw some lessons from existing experiences. I want to stop there. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was very insightful, and we are like getting the ideas of economic loss and damage and non-economic loss and damage from different perspective from different countries. So I'll just invite our another colleague from Christian Aid, Abdul Aguko from Christian Aid Kenya. So he's the Christian Aid Kenya's program manager, as well as he's spearheading the organizational effort to eradicate poverty. In this role, he works alongside the country team and regional advisors, as well as the overseas strategic development and management of the humanitarian and development programs portfolio of Christian Aid's country-based engagement. So, Mr. Abdul, are you ready to go?
Yes, I am. Good afternoon and thank you. Could you kindly project from your end?
Yes. Yes. Is it okay?
So, yeah, that's okay. Thank you. We can kindly just go to the second slide. Yeah, thank you so much. So I work with Christian Aid, and as an international development and humanitarian agency, we have been in this space for the past 70 years across 37 countries. And we do work with all faith in our pursuit to eradicating poverty. Next, please. Next, please. Yeah, so Christian Aid, we are currently working around 4 thematic areas, one being governance and rights, gender justice, peace building and conflict prevention, and lastly, climate adaptation and resilience. But in the midst of all these, there is the aspect of looking at the power imbalance, understanding the root causes of poverty, and also speaking truth to power. And also we do have the aspect of the triple nexus in terms of looking at the humanitarian development and ensuring that whatever programming we do implement speaks to, it does inform advocacy or it's aligned to particular advocacy strategies. Next. Yeah, so in Kenya, we have been here since 1997, working across 20 counties. And our focus mainly in the pursuit of eradication of poverty is mainly the ultra poor in both rural and urban areas, and especially in the rural areas. We are focusing on the arid and semi-arid lands who bear the brunt of extreme poverty. Yeah, so in as far as non-economic loss and damage is concerned, our work within the ASAL, we do implement a couple of climate and emergency programming, and the NELD has really been severe to the vulnerabilities of these regions to climate change impacts. The work that Christian Aid does engage in, climate is at the center of it in terms of guiding our decisions and actions and ensuring that the voice and agency of the most vulnerable are really brought to the fore. And so our experience, especially on NELD, is that one, there are individuals who really lose their livelihoods. There are pastoralist communities who are defined by them possessing the various herds of cattle, big camel. And so when there are droughts, this leads to crop failure and livestock deaths. And so as a result, they are able to really lose income and food. In terms of displacement and migration, the communities whom we work with, majorly they are pastoralists, and so they'll be moving from one area to another in search for both pasture and water. And so extreme weather events has consistently forced them to move from their own areas to other areas. And so even the housing that they have to put up, the structures are really temporary. And this leads into the third aspect, which is health impacts, whereby climate does exacerbate the health problems, because as a result of extreme weather conditions, you'll find that individuals from such kind of communities, especially the ASAL, they are predisposed to particular health concerns, for instance, malnutrition, waterborne diseases when there is flooding, and even mental health issues, because when one loses all their livelihoods, there's very limited chance that they'll still remain sane in such environments. And then also the ecosystem degradation. The ASAL areas where we do implement most of our climate work is really home to unique biodiversity and ecosystems, which are really threatened by the various climate change impacts. And so you'll find that deforestation is really rampant, soil erosion, and so there's no agriculture, limited agriculture that can take place in such kind of areas, and also loss of habitat for wildlife. So you'll find that there is human-wildlife conflict in these areas. Next. And so for us, we do understand that small grants are really essential for the community-driven climate actions at the various lower level in terms of adaptation. And so the grants are really essential in addressing the non-economic loss damages in ASAL counties, because through that we are able to really build resilience and adaptation capacity. And so we have been able to really work with community members through localization and supporting them through micro grants to really set up livelihoods programming, and also be able to facilitate their various homesteads. And so some of the ways that this has been done is one with regards to community-based adaptation. We do provide the various funding to the community-led projects where they're able to really identify what their needs are, be it water harvesting, drought resistance crop cultivation, and maybe sustainable land management. As an organization, we have been able to really champion decentralized climate finance. And as a result of the work that we were able to do, this set the country on a trajectory to have the FLOCA funds. And so through the decentralized climate financing, citizens in the various grassroots levels are really given power to make decisions on climate actions, and subnational governments are able to allocate about 2 to 3% of the budget towards climate. Then on the aspect of livelihoods diversification, we have been able to really support income generating activities, for instance, beekeeping, poultry keeping, and even small scale enterprises, where communities from these ASAL areas are really able to really become resilient and some livelihoods, and earn some income and also improve their livelihoods. And this has really been instrumental, particularly through our various approaches, survivor community-led response, participatory results appraisal, village savings and learning activities. Last but not least is the aspect of capacity building and awareness, whereby we have been able to really invest in training programs and educational campaigns on climate change adaptation, through various strategies that are able to really enhance disaster risk reduction and empower communities to better cope with future impacts of climate change. Next, please. And so, but even as much as we do advocate for small grants, we are aware to the fact that there are challenges in as far as small grants is concerned. And we do really appreciate the fact that partners, for instance, CGRF and other partners have been really instrumental in ensuring that we do have systems and strategies in place. But then the limitations that we do face, one is with regards to limited funding. The funding amounts that we are able to give are really not sufficient to address the scale of the NELD impacts in the ASAL regions. And so there is request to really get additional financial resources for long-term investments from both government and development partners. The other aspect is with regards to coordination and collaboration. As stakeholders, we do quite a lot, but there is need for improved coordination amongst us as stakeholders, be it state actors, non-state actors, and the local community, to really ensure effective implementation of the various projects and avoid duplication. Then there is the aspect also of monitoring and evaluation, whereby we are able to really assess the impacts and effectiveness of such kind of grants. And so partnerships with research institutions, for instance, Christian Aid is having that with Strathmore University, are really key in ensuring that we are able to utilize local knowledge to inform programming. Last but not least is the policy and institutional support. Through the work that we did with CGRF, we were able to ensure that a couple of laws that empowered women, youth, and those in the communities were able to really hold to account their subnational governments to ensure that the budgeting was really able to address their issues. So strengthening the policy frameworks and institutional capacity at both the national and county level is really essential for mainstreaming the various considerations into development planning and decision making. Next. Thank you so much. Over to you, Sumaya.
Thank you so much, Abdul, for giving us a very brief idea about the whole work that you are going to that you are conducting, as well as you have had the specification of the issues, problems, and the recommendation. Thank you for that. And now I'll invite Aisha Dinshaw. She is the Loss and Damage Program Officer at the Climate Justice Resilience Fund, CJRF. She programs CJRF's grant making on loss and damage and supports the learning and advocacy based on grants made. Aisha, over to you, and our IT team will share your presentation.
Thanks, Sumaya. I think I can share also if that's easier.
Whatever you find easy, no problem.
All right, let me try, and if it doesn't work.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it's showing.
Okay. Great. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Aisha, as Sumaya said, and I'm the Loss and Damage Program Officer at the Climate Justice Resilience Fund, or CJRF. CJRF is a pooled fund, which means we collect funds from different sources and then we make grants. And we have a focus for our grant making to really empower people, especially women, youth, and Indigenous people that are on the front lines of climate change. And we sort of try and empower them to create and share their own solutions for resilience. So it's a very community-driven approach. I'm going to provide a little bit of background on our work on loss and damage. So we have gathered up all of our work on loss and damage and are calling it the Community's First Pilot Fund. And this began in 2022, and it really builds on previous grants on related topics such as migration or climate forced mobility that began when CJRF first started in 2017. But formally, our loss and damage work began at COP26 when Scotland, as the first wealthy country, explicitly funded loss and damage, put funding on the table, and committed £1 million to CJRF. So we made 5 major grants between 2022 and 2023 with this £1 million, 2 in Bangladesh to organizations called IPSA and Helvetas, 1 in Malawi to an organization called CARD, 1 to our partner UUSC, and UUSC works all across the Pacific. So they made smaller grants to their local partners on different islands across the Pacific, and then 1 to the Loss and Damage Youth Coalition. And what they did with their grant was kind of stand up a youth grant-making council and made 11 small grants with that funding. So it was grants for youth by youth. And all these interventions, as I said before, are community-driven and really center people's the needs that communities express and how they want to address their loss and damage. And this set of grants constituted the first set of grants within this pilot fund that we have. Then in September 2023, the Scottish Government announced an additional £5 million to CJRF, and this funding would focus on non-economic loss and damage. So this is what I'm going to talk about today. I want to kind of explain how we're going to be using this funding and what we hope to achieve with this funding. So the NELD program of work that we're beginning now has a set of objectives that we're trying to achieve. The first is that communities really develop and implement cohesive visions and plans for addressing NELD. But critically, the speakers who spoke before me raised this point very eloquently, that communities is a very general term, and it often doesn't automatically account for really different perspectives and needs within a community. So different religions, traditionally marginalized population, women and girls, their voices are not at the fore. So when we say, help communities do this or that, develop visions, we really need to very explicitly ensure that there are mechanisms to account for different perspectives and different priorities within that community. And our partners that use our grants are fantastic at doing this, and they do this in all sorts of different ways that depend on their context. The second is that we really want to make sure we have a diversity of geographies that we reach with this funding, but also that we test out different participatory mechanisms or methodologies to spread this funding across these geographies. And again, it's sort of this testing approach of what works where and how. The third point is that we feel quite strongly that we want to enable this funding to co-create a clear narrative around NELD. As others have said, dealing with addressing NELD is fairly new. There has been some work underway that we want to build upon, but it's still fairly new, and to allow for these grants to kind of have a community-driven narrative come from the actual work on the ground and then inform policy spaces, inform the new Loss and Damage Fund would be very powerful. And that's sort of the last point where we really have a strong emphasis on learning and sharing that learning so that it goes beyond just our own portfolio. These parameters are quite similar to what I just explained, but they're a little bit more specific, and I wanted to drill down on the specifics a little and flag that one thing that we've been moving towards at CJRF is we've always had women be a core constituent in our grant making, and we think that gender sensitive grant making and programming is still critical. At the same time, we're shifting also, not instead of, but in addition to kind of intersectional approaches and ensuring that the different identities of marginalized groups are also addressed. And so our new board has developed an intersectionality statement, and we're going to be trying to figure out how to operationalize that in this set of grants. As I mentioned before, and in the second point, the NELD work will be community driven and locally led. The third point talks about the different time horizons that communities face loss and damage over. And we know that sometimes there's slow onset events and sometimes rapid onset. And honestly, sometimes cases where both are happening at the same time. There's an ongoing slow onset event, but then, like salinization. And then on top of that, there are cyclones or other extreme weather events. And so we want to make sure that the grants address these different time horizons. The fourth point is something that others have spoken about, and this just speaks to this huge range of what counts as non-economic loss and damage. And it can be everything from, mental health and trauma to the effects of climate-forced displacement, gender-based violence, loss of opportunity, loss of schooling. And it's a very big range, and our hope is that our grant making is open to whatever communities say they are experiencing as NELD. And then the last point, as I mentioned before, is just making sure we have a good geographic spread. So what this means in terms of actual grants that we're hoping to make in 2024 is the first set of bullets is on regional and collaborative grant making. And we have 3 focus regions. We have the Pacific Islands, and we're working with our partner UUSD again in the Pacific. So they're going to make grants to their partners on different islands in the Pacific. And in the first round of grant making, these partners actually, a lot of NELD oriented things came up, which they're going to build on in this second round of grants. The second stream is the Bay of Bengal. So CJRF has a set of very trusted partners in the Bay of Bengal, and we are going to build on this set of partnerships to expand to new partners in this region. And make a set of grants there. And then the third is in East Africa. Similarly, we have partners there that we have worked with, but using their support and recommendations to build out, hopefully, into other grant partners as well. So these are the 3 regional streams of grant making. The second bullet in 2024 is talking about small grants. So typically, CJRF grants are what we call mid-size grants, which are about $250,000. Give or take. That's what we're imagining for the regional grants, multiple of this size grant in each region. But we recognize that there are organizations at the grassroots level that are doing incredible work, and we want to be able to support them with grants that small grants, if that's what they are sort of able to absorb. And so we're going to do this not through CJRF ourselves, but through our partners, Global Green Grants Fund, and LDYC's Youth Grant Making Council that I spoke about before. So GGF, Global Green Grants Fund, has an incredible participatory model of advisory boards, and these boards already exist, and they are able to reach areas of the world that CJRF isn't able to. So for instance, they have some really strong work on Indigenous peoples in South America. And so this stream of small grants that will go through GGF will just be able to reach partners that we may not be able to reach otherwise. And then the Loss and Damage Youth Coalition Grant Making Council. This funding is not specific to NELD, but we're sort of hoping and expecting to see applications come in for those grants that do focus on NELD, and then they would also be part of this NELD portfolio. And finally, in 2025, early 2025, we expect to hold a global open call. And this will also be participatory, but will be open to any organization anywhere in the world, and really enable us to reach, again, communities that we haven't been able to reach through the previous grant making that I explained. I want to kind of spend a little bit of time just talking about how we plan to support this work, because NELD is fairly new, and we don't expect our implementing grant partners to have all the knowledge and all the support and all the resources that they need, especially given the range of things that can count as NELD, right? So if the community they're working with, if there's, a list of a few needs and priorities that arise, and our implementing partner, our grant partner, doesn't have the expertise to address all of that, we have built in ways that they can access support to do that. So we've hired a new person on our team, and her role is to really do two things. One is to help our partners integrate gender considerations into their work. And then the second two bullets here, resource identification and provision. Her job is to really help identify these gaps or needs that our partners have, and then link them up with whether it's a training or technical assistance or other form of resources with individuals and organizations that can provide that to our partners. So in this way, it's also a capacity building effort to enable our partners to actually address NELD. And then the last set of bullets at the bottom is really around learning and advocacy, because we want to make sure that everything we're doing here is documented, both in terms of how are we taking participatory, inclusive processes, what are these processes that our partners are using, and how are they implementing their work, but also the what. So what is it that communities are saying? Are there non-economic loss and damage, and how do they want to address this? So, really building on examples that you've seen in the previous presentations. To do this, we have specific learning partners. We're going to have a regional learning partner in each of those three regions of the Pacific, Bay of Bengal, and East Africa. And then we're really pleased to be working with ECAD as the global learning partner. And so ECAD is going to help us harness these lessons and, across the entire portfolio, the regions and the open call and everything. And then we want to be able to have these lessons translated into advocacy, for the Loss and Damage Fund to really enable that fund to provide direct access to communities, to provide community-driven support for what community-driven, locally led addressing of loss and damage can look like. So that's kind of our vision for how we're hoping to program this NELD work, and I'm happy to answer questions here or later for anyone who has them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aisha, for your overall overview from your grant making process and what you are doing on CJRF from the perspective of loss and damage and non-economic loss and damage. So before we go to the open discussion, we want to show that from all of the conversation, we have covered it all kind of. It's from the discussion, we got the localized action thing, we got the national mechanism improvement, we got international level policy advocacy, as well as the capacity building. And when we were discussing about the whole perspective from each organization or work, we have pointed on the evidence collection, we pointed on the financing mechanism, and also the inclusion. So for the evidence-based perspective, how we can showcase our stories and key studies, we'll just showcase one of the example on that, and then we'll be moving to the open discussion and then the ending. So Rakib, can you please play the video?
পাহাড়, নদী, বিল এবং দিগন্ত জোড়া কৃষি জমি বাংলাদেশে আমার নিজ জেলাকে দিয়েছে অপার সৌন্দর্য, নেত্রকোনা। এখানকার বেশিরভাগ মানুষই কৃষিকাজ করে। আমি বড় হয়েছি বাবাকে ধান চাষ করতে দেখতে দেখতে। আমাদের উঠানে প্রায় সারা বছরই ধান ও খড় ছড়িয়ে ছিটিয়ে থাকতো, কিন্তু সময় বদলে যাচ্ছে। শেষ গ্রীষ্মকালে বন্যায় অনেক পানি হয়েছিল এবং সেটা অনেক দিন ধরে ছিল। একটানা বৃষ্টি হতে দেখেছি আমরা সময় মতো ধান শুকাতে পারিনি। আমাদের ধান পচতে শুরু করেছিল, এতে আমার পরিবারের আয় প্রভাবিত হয়েছে। একটা গবেষণা প্রজেক্ট আমাকে দুর্গাপুর উপজেলায় নিয়ে এসেছে। এই জায়গাটি আমার গ্রাম থেকে 30 মিটার দূরত্বে অবস্থিত। এখানকার মানুষও আবহাওয়ার পরিবর্তনগুলো অনুভব করতে পারে। কিভাবে দেখছেন?
আমি এটাকে দেখছি, এটা প্রকৃতি যেমন নিজেরাই নিজে পরিবর্তন হইতেছে, এটা আমরা রোধ করে ক্ষমতা, কিন্তু আমরা এটাকে আরো বেশি রোধ করতে বেকাবান করতেছি। অন্যদিকে একটা গাছ কাটে মানে ক্ষতি চিন্তা করলাম, আমাকে ক্ষতি করলাম, এটাও প্রকৃতিকে ক্ষতি করলাম, এটা এফেক্ট করবে আমাকে। ইঞ্জিনের ধোঁয়া, মেন কাঠার ধোঁয়া, এটা পরিবেশে ব্যাপক ক্ষতি করতেছে। এতে ক্ষতির ভুক্তভোগী হইতে হবে জনগণ, দেখুন জনগণ বা নাগরিকরা, দেশবাসী যারা আছে তারা ক্ষতি হচ্ছে। আর এই খরা হতেছে, এই ওলা বৃষ্টি হতেছে, বৃষ্টি হচ্ছে, ক্ষতি বৃষ্টি, ওলা বৃষ্টি, এগুলো মানে নিয়মটাকে আমরা রাখছি।
দুর্গাপুর উপজেলার কিছু জায়গা বন্যায় অনেক ক্ষতিগ্রস্ত হয়েছে। উদাহরণস্বরূপ কাউকান্দিয়া গ্রামটি, যেখানে রোহিত বাস করে।
17/6/2022 রোজ শুক্রবার ছিল, সকাল 8 ঘটিকায় পাহাড়ি ডলের বন্যা এসে আমার একটা সুন্দর বাড়ি ছিল, এই বাড়িটা 10 থেকে 15 মিনিট সময়ের ভিতরেই একেবারে বিলীন হয়ে গেছে। ঘরটা এই জায়গায় ছিল, এই বিল্ডিং ঘর ছিল, হাফ বিল্ডিং। তো এইখান থেকে কোনো কিছু নাই, এখন একটা গর্ত হিসাবে পরিচিত। আর অনেকেই জানে যে এখানে কোনো বাড়ি ছিল না, এরকম মনে হয়। কিন্তু যারা দেখছে যে আমার বাড়িটা এত সুন্দর একটা বাড়ি ছিল, এটা আমার শখের বাড়ি ছিল। বাড়ির ভিতরেও অনেক গাছ টাছ ছিল, আম গাছ টাম গাছ, অনেক ফলফলান্তি গাছ। আর সবচেয়ে আমি গুরুত্ব দিয়েছিলাম যে আমার বাচ্চারা এসএসসি পরীক্ষার্থী, 2023-এ এই ফেব্রুয়ারি মার্চ এপ্রিলে পরীক্ষা হবে। আমি শুধু আগে আমার বাচ্চার বইগুলা টেবিল থেকে একটা লঙ্গি করে বাসায় শুধু জাস্ট উঠতেই সব কিছু বাসায় নিয়ে গেল।
শুধুমাত্র ওগুলাই বাঁচাতে পারছে,
এইগুলাই বাঁচাতেছে, আর কোনো কিছু বাঁচানোর কোনো সম্ভব হচ্ছে না। আর আমি এখন যে জায়গায় আছি, অন্যের বাসায় বাসমান হিসেবে, আমি সারাদিন মানুষের সাথে চলাফেরা করি, হয়তো এই সময় দুঃখটা কম হয়, কিন্তু সন্ধ্যার দিকে যখন আমি বাড়িতে ঘুরি তখন আমার ভীষণ কষ্ট হয়।
শুধুমাত্র ঘরই নয়, জলবায়ু পরিবর্তন তার থেকেও বেশি ক্ষতি করে। আমরা জীবনে যা কিছু মূল্য দেই, এটি সব কিছুকে স্পর্শ করে। এটি আমাদের জীবনকে কল্পনাতীতভাবে ব্যাহত করে। এমনকি খুবই ক্ষুদ্র জিনিস হতে পারে আমাদের ঐতিহ্যবাহী চালের তৈরি কেক, পিঠা।
এটা আমার কাছে অনেক গুরুত্বপূর্ণ। তো আমরা এই যে দুর্যোগে বৃষ্টির কারণে কত ফসল না, আমরা ফসল ঠিক মতন মারাইতে পারি না, আগের মতন পিঠা বানাইতেও পারি না। আগে পিঠা বানায় নিজেও খাইতাম, আত্মীয় স্বজন দিতাম, প্রতিবেশীকে দিতাম। পরবর্তীতে মনে হলো আগের চেয়ে অনেক কমে গেছে পিঠা বানানি। এমতো দিন আইব একদিন থাকতো হারাইয়া যাইব। আমরা যে পিঠা বানায় আগে খাইছি, অনেক পোলাহানি এটি দেখছি, অনেক জাতের পিঠা বানাইছি আগে আমরা।
পিঠাটা কেন গুরুত্বপূর্ণ?
গুরুত্বপূর্ণ মানে পিঠাটা বানাইলে মনের মধ্যে ফুর্তি লাগে, আমোদ লাগে, পোলাহানে খা, ঘুরিয়া ঘুরিয়া খা। তারা মনের মধ্যে যে পিঠা বানায় মন হালে লয়ে যাবো এই বাড়ি সেই বাড়ি দৌড় মারিয়া কান দেয় পিঠার লাগিয়া, এলে কিন্তু অনেক গুরুত্বপূর্ণ। আগে তো তোমার শীতকালে আমরা পুলি বানাইছি, পোয়া বানাইছি, তারপরে দুধ চিতই বানাইছি, সেমাই বানাইছি, অনেক জাতের পিঠা বানাইছি, দই পিঠা বানাইছি। নারকেল ওয়াইনা বৃষ্টিপাত কম, কড়া বেশি, নারকেলের কলি হইয়া জায়গা সত্ত্বে।
বিশেষভাবে হিন্দু কমিউনিটি ক্ষতিগ্রস্ত হচ্ছে, যেহেতু তাদের বেশিরভাগ প্রথাই প্রকৃতি এবং জমির উপর নির্ভরশীল।
ফুল গাছে এটাই অবস্থা, মানে আর কি ফল ধরে কম, ফুল ধরে কম।
কেন?
এই যে ওয়াইনা মানে পানি দেওয়া সত্ত্বেও মানে আর কি হইতেছে না। এটাই
কি কারণে হচ্ছে না আপনি জানেন বা বুঝতে পারেন?
যে খরান, বেশি তাপমাত্রা, এই কারণে আর কি খরানে মানে যে ফুল, এই যে কুলি ঝুড়া পুড়ে যেতেছে না, হয় না। এরকম তো ফলও তো এরকমই নষ্ট হয়ে যায়, ফল গাছের থেকে ফল ঝুড়া পুড়ে যায়, নষ্ট হয়ে যায়।
ফুল ফলটা কেন আপনাদের কাছে গুরুত্বপূর্ণ?
ফুল আমাদের কাছে এই কারণে গুরুত্ব, কারণ এগুলো আমাদের পূজায় লাগে, কারণ এটাতে আমরা পূজা করি, এই কারণেই মানে আমাদের জন্য এটা গুরুত্বপূর্ণ আর কি বেশি। কম হচ্ছে বলেই তো মানে আমরা মানে এতটা মানে আগে যেরকম ঘুরে করতাম, মানে এত ফুল ফল দিয়া মানে খুব মনে একটা আনন্দ রাখিয়া বা অনেক হইতো, এখন মানে অনেক আর হয় না। এখন মানে অল্প দেওয়া সাইলে আমরা মানে আর কি এটাতে আর কি সন্তুষ্ট করে দিই, যা মানে যে জায়গায় আমরা এত ফুল লাগতো সেই জায়গায় এত ফুলাতে মানে অল্প ফুল দিয়ে করি। আর যে জায়গায় আমরা এই যে এত ফুল কাটতে মানে এই যে ভোগ নিবেদন করতাম, মানে এত ফল দিয়ে আর ভোগ নিবেদন করি না, এখন মানে অল্প ফল দিয়ে সেটাই আমরা যে ভোগ নিবেদন করি। মানে সবারই মানে আর কি মনটা আর কি অন্যরকমই থাকে, যে আগে এত ফুল ফল দেওয়া পুজো হইতো, এখন এই যে একটা দুইটা ফুল ফল দেওয়া পূজা করলে তো এটা কীরকম একটা, হয়তো আমি যা নিয়তে পূজাটা করি হ্যাঁ হয়তো সন্তুষ্ট হইতে পারে, কিন্তু মানুষের মনে তার বলা যায় না।
দুর্যোগ সবাইকে সমানভাবে প্রভাবিত করে না। নারী ও নিম্ন আয়ের পরিবারগুলো বেশি ঝুঁকিপূর্ণ, তারা আরও বেশি ক্ষতির মুখোমুখি হয়।
বন্যার প্রভাব অনেক বেশি হয়েছে। আপনার বন্যার সময় আমি আপনার আরেকবার চৈত্র ফাল্গুন মাসে মনে করেন 60,000 টাকা ঋণ নিয়েছিলাম ডেক্সের দিকে, না একটি কামার দিকে, না হেরা পুরাটা আমি মাছে চাষ করছিলাম। এর 2 বছর আগেও মাছ ছিল। পরে এই টাকাটা যদি উপার্জন হয় বেশি হয়, তাহলে ফুলাখানে লেখাপড়ার খরচাটাও আমরা এন থেকে বাড়িব, আর ঋণের সুদটাও বাড়িয়ে যাবো গা, দিকে ফালাই দিই, কিস্তি কাজ কাম করে আস্তে আস্তে চালাই এমনি। তখন দেখা গেল যে ভাই বন্যা বাসায় হয়ে গেছে গা, আর আমার 6টা ছাগল ছিল, এই ছাগল দিয়ে আমি কী করতে রাখতে পারি না। এর ধান জমিন সব মনে করেন যে ধান জমিন লাগাইলে তো আর ছাগল ফাড়ার মতো সুযোগ নেই। তো আমি ছাগল দিয়ে বেচে মানে আশের কামার দিতে চাইছিলাম। তোর দিক দিয়ে পানি হয়েছে মনে করেন 63টা আসামান নিয়ে গেছে ডলে বাসায়। মুরগি মনে করেন 4-5টা বাচ্চা হলো, মুরগি নষ্ট হয়েছে, এনতে পুকুরে মাছ গেছে গা, হের বাপের এরকম মানুষ নেই। কেমনে কি আমরা কেমনে আগায়াম।
দুর্গাপুরের মানুষজন এই সকল পরিবর্তনের সাথে মানিয়ে নিতে চেষ্টা করছে, নিজের অস্তিত্বের জন্য যুদ্ধ করে। কামারখালী গ্রামের মানুষেরাও, যে গ্রামটি সোমেশ্বরী নদীর ঠিক তীরেই অবস্থিত।
প্রথম অবস্থায় ছিল ওই আর থেকে আর কিনা অনেক দূরে ছিল, পরে আবার ওখান থেকে বাঙ্গনের আবার এইদিকে আসলাম, আবার বিয়া চেঞ্জ করতে করতে আর কিনা 3 ধাপ হয়ে গেছে আমরা। তারপরে নদী বান এমন ভাবে ভাঙছে বলার মতো না, আমরা জন্মে এরকম দেখি না এখানে ভাঙনটা আর কি।
এই বছরগুলোতে
বেশি ভাঙছে আর কিনা। পরে আবার আমরা নিজেরাই আবার সবাই মিলে আমরা একটা কমিটি গঠন করলাম, সবাই নিয়ে গ্রামের সবাই নিয়ে আমরা বস্তা নিজে সেলাই করে আমরা বালু বললাম। আর আমরা ছেলেগুলা আর কিনা যুবকগুলা গ্রামে গ্রামে গিয়ে বাস আর কিনা সংগ্রহ করছে, কি সংগ্রহ করিয়া পরে খুঁটি গাড়াইছে। খুঁটি গাড়ানো রাখতে পারলাম না, বস্তাও রাখতে পারলাম না, পরে মানব বন্ধন করলাম। মানব বন্ধন করে পরে সরকার থেকে আমাদের জন্য এই যে দিল আর কি না এই বস্তা,
এই বাঁধটা নির্মাণ করে দিয়েছে। এখন কি মনে হয় যে যে বাঁধটা নির্মাণ করে দিয়েছে আপনাদের, এটা যথেষ্ট টেকসই, এটা দিয়ে আপনাদের হয়ে যাবে?
না, আমরা চাই হলো ব্লক, এটা তো আমাদের টেকসই হইতো না।
তো এটাতে কয় বছর দেখা যাচ্ছে হচ্ছে?
এটা তো আমাদের জন্য মনে হয় 4 থেকে 5 বছর হইতে পারে, না 4 থেকে 5 বছর।
এখানকার মানুষজন আবহাওয়া পরিবর্তনের জন্য সৃষ্টিকর্তাকে দায়ী করে। কেউ কেউ বিশ্বাস করে যে সৃষ্টিকর্তা আমাদের পাপের জন্য মানব জাতিকে শাস্তি দিচ্ছেন। হয়তো তারা সঠিক, মানুষই প্রাকৃতিক ভারসাম্য নষ্ট করছে। এখন আমাদের আরও বিপর্যয়ের সম্মুখীন হতে হচ্ছে। আমি জানি বাংলাদেশের মানুষজন এর জন্য দায়ী নয়, কিন্তু আমাদের জনগণ সবচেয়ে বেশি ভোগে। মানুষের চোখে আমি কষ্ট দেখেছি, আর ব্যাগ ভর্তি গল্প নিয়ে দুর্গাপুর থেকে চলে যাচ্ছি। ক্ষতি, ট্রমা এবং সংগ্রামের অসংখ্য গল্প, এবং আমি বুঝতে পারি যে আমরা একা এই সংগ্রামগুলো কাটিয়ে উঠতে পারি না।
It also creates a hierarchy and also creates a social tension.
Hello, everyone. So, yeah, we are back into our discussion. So, as you have already seen the video, and with the some of the last statements from the video, that's actually true that we are not we are liable, and we need to do our work. Just one. Hello, sorry about that. So as you all know that we are conducting our Gobeshona Global Conference online. So we are stationed in a specific place where all of our team are working in different segments of the conference. So yeah, as I was just saying that from the video that we are actually liable for like the human-induced climate change. So obviously we are liable for that, but as well as we need to focus on people's perception as well as what is their suffering. So from the video we saw that how even for prayer offering, how it's related with the changing climate. So in this point of the discussion, if there is any question from the attendees, you can raise your hand and we can just get the answers of your question, or if there is any suggestion or anything that you want to talk about, you can just raise your hand if there is any. Yes, Abdul, do you want to come in?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, Sumaya. So I think having watched the video from Bangladesh, I suppose that climate change is real and extreme weather conditions really do impact. Their impacts really, they go over and beyond the aspect of economics. So there ought to be a lot of mitigation measures that we need to really put in, because as you can tell from the video, houses were swept away, kids were not able to go to school, the crop production went down. There are a couple of food stuff that now the community members were not able to prepare. But the most important aspect was the voice and agency of the community members who are really vulnerable. And I think that not only for us as actors in the climate justice discourse, but then to each and everyone. Every measure that we really come up with has to be informed by the community members, has to have the voice and the agency of the community members as a central aspect. The second aspect is with regards to gender equality and social inclusion. In as far as engaging in some of these interventions, we have to really look at how impactful or how effective will it be to the various gender dynamics, and how best can we really be able to ensure that each and every gender has a voice and is able to be represented in all these. Lastly is the element of maybe policy and advocacy, because from the aspect of loss and damage, you are able to implement the various intervention, but then there ought to be policies in place. And so for these policies to really be functional, the various community members have to come together, prioritize. So for instance, as I mentioned, that for us as Christian Aid in Kenya, we do have survivor community-led response, whereby community members come together, identify what the problem is, and then they're given micro grants that they're able to really implement in such kind of circumstances. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abdul, for your insightful suggestions. Yes, we obviously need to do that. And as I was just saying before the video, that all of our presentation actually covers different kinds of segments of inclusion, like whether it's geographical or gender-based, as well as all of the proper interventions, as well as the liability, as well as and the different kinds of interventions and the monitoring and evaluation. So we got all of our points. So is there any other question or any audience, if anyone want to ask any questions? If there is no question, then I'll be moving to the ending of our session. I'm just waiting for 30 seconds if there is any question from anyone. I think there is no question, so I will invite Heather McGray from CJRF. She's the director of the Climate Justice Resilience Fund, and a position she has held since the inception of the fund in 2016. She has spent more than 20 years in the nonprofit sector, working from local to the global levels on climate change, community development, environmental governance, and education. Over to you, Heather, for the closing remarks of our session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Samaya, and thank you to all the organizers and presenters and the filmmaker for such a rich session today and for really shedding some light on this issue of non-economic loss and damage. As we learn more and more about climate change and how it's playing out, we're really confronted with a lot of what you all saw just now in the film, for example, of how deeply climate change can affect people on so many different levels, whether we're talking about education or we're talking about religious practice, or we're talking about so many day-to-day activities that are about livelihoods and lives, but more deeply about people's identity and people's well-being and the whole concept of community and what it means to be a happy, healthy, thriving human being. And the whole issue of non-economic loss and damage really brings this to the fore. And I'm really grateful to the colleagues here who are really helping much of this climate movement that has been so focused for so long on science and polar bears and counting greenhouse gas emissions. This is really reframing and importantly recentering human rights, human values, human beings on a holistic level, on who we are and what's really important for people. I hope everyone can keep that in mind as we forge forward on the frontier of this very challenging space, this whole question of, well, what is loss and damage? What is non-economic loss and damage? Fundamentally, this is about whole human beings and whole communities and keeping them at the center of the climate agenda, uplifting their agency and supporting them to figure out how to forge a thriving human existence in this new arena, this new world of climate change. I just want to, again, express gratitude to everyone who's doing this challenging work. I heard so many wise remarks about the importance of communities organizing themselves and building their own voices and their own power. This is what we are trying to do with our funding at the Climate Justice Resilience Fund, of keeping that voice and that power building at the center of what we do, whether we're working on non-economic loss and damage or community land rights or women's issues and Indigenous issues and climate change. This is fundamentally what we're trying to do. And we really believe that there's a role for highly participatory and often quite community-led and community-grounded small grant making in this. We partner with a large number of organizations, including ECAD and Christian Aid and others you've heard from today, to make sure that funding for loss and damage really is driven by the priorities and the realities of people who are experiencing loss and damage. And this is something we want to see prioritized as funding flows grow and as new structures are created at global and national level. It's really important to make certain that that agency and that sense of prioritization still stays with people who are on the front lines of this crisis. I don't want to take up too much more of your time here today. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with all of you. And again, thank you for hosting this session and for including CJRF in your work.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Heathers, for your excellent closing remarks. It concludes all of the things. Thank you so much. As I have mentioned in the message that if you can just open your front camera, the panelist, our team will take a photo of the online session as we are not in person. So can you please, ICA team, can you please do that, the screenshot? Okay,
Nice to
it's
see
done.
everyone's faces.
Nice to see you too. So thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you so much for joining in the Gobeshona Global Conference. Hope to see you in the next year, and see you around. Thank you so